afternoon, Council. Just want to make sure that you can hear me. Okay, great. Welcome everyone to the District of Squamish Special Business Meeting for Tuesday, May 4th. We're meeting today on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. Motion to adopt the agenda by Councillor Herford, second by Councillor French. Any opposed? Motion carries. We are working under Ministerial Order M192, which makes sure that we're clear about how we're ensuring openness, transparency, accessibility, and accountability at the meeting while public attendance in person is not enabled because of public health guidelines. So this meeting is being live streamed. A video of this meeting will be available on the district's website for viewing on an on-demand basis, and the meeting is open to the public for electronic participation via WebEx. Someone that would move that motion? Moved by Councillor Stoner, second by Councillor Anderson. Any opposed? Motion carries. So we are meeting electronically. Just a reminder that if a council member disconnects or reconnects to the meeting, to let me know so this can be recorded in the minutes. Raise your hand if you wish to speak, if you're connected by video, or say chair if for some reason you're connected by audio only. With respect to a vote, council members are only required to state a nay vote, so no statements required if you're in favor. We ask that everyone keep their telephone or computer on mute. That's staff, public, and council, unless it's their turn to speak. We do expect everyone on council to be involved in and participate in the meeting. And if you're having technical difficulties, council, please text the corporate officer and so that she can help get you reconnected. If the technical challenge is on our side, we'll recess for up to 10 minutes to get everyone reconnected again. So with that behind us, just one item on our open agenda for this afternoon, and that is our 2020 audited financial statements. And we will be joined by our Paul Fripp and Andrew Davies from BDO.
Good afternoon, Council. Can you see me and hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. I'm just going to share my screen. All right, and you can see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Great. Okay. Good afternoon, Mary Elliott, members of council and members of the community. My name is Heather Boxford, Chief Financial Officer here at the District of Squamish. And today I'm joined here with our municipal auditors from BDO who are appointed by council. Please welcome Andrew Davies, BDO Audit Manager, and Paul Fripp, BDO Partner.
Did you want us to wait? We can wait.
Hi, everyone. Hello.
I can't actually see them, so I'm hoping that they're getting some waves. All right, so the goal here today is for council to receive and accept the 2020 consolidated financial statements. In terms of agenda, we have a light agenda today. Well, as light as financial statements will be, that is. I will be presenting the salient points of the consolidated financial statements, and then we will open it up to council for Q&A to staff and the BDO team. Okay, so for council and public background for the legal process, Section 167 of the Community Charter requires that financial statements be presented and accepted by council. Pursuant to this, the consolidated financial statements be sent to the municipal inspector by May 15th annually. And then Section 171 requires the municipal auditor to report to council on the audit review of the financial statements, which they will do today. So in terms of the 2020 financial results, both high-level goals of the 2020 fiscal were met. The first goal is to meet the 2020 financial budget, which despite additional pressures from revenue decreases and increased associated costs with COVID-19 pandemic, they were met. The second high-level fiscal goal is to receive an unqualified opinion that provides reasonable assurance that the consolidated financial statements are free from material error based on the results of the 2020 audit procedures, and that too was met. And probably even more importantly, the financial statements indicate that the district is in good financial health, which can at minimum be assessed to the degree that the organization is sustainable, flexible, and the degree to which it is vulnerable. So in terms of sustainability, in the context of financial health, means that the district has adequate financial means to maintain its existing financial obligations, as illustrated by the 2020 $33 million net financial asset balance. This is an indicator that the organization is sustainable for the short term to medium term. So the higher the net asset position, the longer the organization can sustain operations from revenues being impaired. In terms of flexibility, the district currently has 11% authorized debt service costs as a percent of revenues, which is significantly lower than the MFA debt servicing limit of 25%. The district also has a financial policy to keep the debt servicing limit at below 20%. So lower debt service ratios is an indicator of flexibility as it provides room for debt issuance as well as interest burden is placed on current revenues. And finally, in terms of vulnerability, the district currently has low vulnerability due to low revenue reliance on outside or variable revenues in order to sustain operations annually. So examples of a variable revenue are government transfers and recreation revenues or transit revenues. Tax, which is lion's share of the district's revenues, is considered a secure, reliable revenue source in the short to medium term. So it provides some less vulnerability there. To note, further long-term financial health predictions are forthcoming with the development of the long-term financial plan, which is work in conjunction with the real estate and facilities master plan, the asset management plan, and other master plans which outline material future long-term expenditures and debt requirements. So that's a big body of work that will be coming soon. So in terms of 2020 financial statements review, I just want to highlight a few key elements here. Firstly, as I've already mentioned, the district's 2020 consolidated financial statements indicate that results met the financial plan. Worth noting is that consolidated within the financial statements are two subsidiaries, the Squamish Sustainability Corporation and the Squamish Public Library. Also worth noting is the financial statements do not include financial plan amendments approved during the year, which is another reason why we rely on the quarterly financial report, which does include the financial plan amendment and provides internal timely context on the financial status of the organization and respective projects throughout the fiscal. As required by legislation, local governments balance their budget within the financial plan. However, this includes sources and uses of funding not recognized in the consolidated statement of operations. And those include borrowing, capital expenditures, principal repayments on debt, transfers to and from reserves, and transfers to and from accumulated surplus. So focusing first on the consolidated statement of financial position, which is the first statement in the package. At December 31st, 2020, the accumulated surplus position is at 348 million, which is an increase over a prior year of 50 million. So it is important to note that this includes investments in tangible capital assets as well as savings that are placed in the statutory reserves and non-statutory provisions and unappropriated accumulated surplus. So note 12 of the financial statements illustrates this breakdown of the district's equity position. This includes investments in tangible capital assets at 281 million, unappropriated surplus 5.42 million, non-statutory reserves, otherwise known as provisions, at 10.2 million, and then statutory reserves of 51 million. To highlight a few significant variances to prior year, so increase of $20 million in cash and cash equivalents is in part due to increase in reserve and provisions, and in part due to by debt issuance, which replenished temporary internal borrowing during the year. As well, the school tax remittance of approximately $6 million was due to the deadline delay in 2020 as a result of the COVID-19 and the BC Restart grant recipient of of 3.8 million. Increase of 5 million accounts payable, accrued, and other liabilities, which is primarily due to the school tax remittance on the other side, so on the liability side, and increased efforts to accrue expenditures at year end, offset by historical cleanup of deposit accounts and timing. And the audit report will explain a little bit more of that. Increase of 10 million in debt is due to the 2020 debt issuance for projects that were completed or phase of the project that was completed in 2019 and therefore was financed in 2020. And then finally, increase of 44 million in tangible capital assets, which represents assets acquired, completed, or work in progress in 2020 and is further outlined in the Schedule 1 and 2 of the financial statements. Moving on to the consolidated statement of operations. So significant variances to budget primarily include 800,000, increase in utility revenues, which is due to increased customer served and wastewater utilities than anticipated in the financial plan. 3.8 million in government transfers for operating due to BC Safe Restart for Local Governments grant. The full amount of the grant is recognized in revenue, and then the unspent amounts were put into a provision under the non-statutory reserves in Note 12. You will also find more details in the unaudited Schedule 5 of the financial statement package. 1 million decrease in transportation and transit costs due to the decrease in ridership and routes, as well as BC Transit lease-free holiday during the pandemic for the bus leases. And then in the section called Other of the Consolidated Statements, there is several significant variances that I'll illustrate. 9.5 million decrease in government transfers for capital to the financial plan. Generally, government grants are not recognized into revenue until the capital expenditure that it funds occurs. And then similarly with the DCCs, that the fund capital are not recognized as capital revenue until the capital expenditure that it funds occurs. So therefore a variance of 4.2 million in DCC revenue as well, capital revenue. And then finally, 39 million of developer contributed assets were received in 2020. The primary source of this was the oceanfront development. However, there were some contributions from Sirocco, Tarsem House, Soleil, and some other miscellaneous contributions recorded as well. So then finally, the statement of net change in financial assets has an increase of 2.2 million in amortization against financial plan, which is due to the financial planning error in 2020 being based on the 2018 assets and not including 2019 and 2020 acquisitions and amortization values. Worth noting as well is we newly developed procedures with tangible capital assets. Staff are now able to actually allow amortization to be calculated on the net assets based on the date the asset was placed in service, rather than historically only 1 month of amortization was used or calculated when the asset in the year that the asset was put into service. So those are the key highlights of the 2020 consolidated financial statements. Just to reiterate, the goal today is to receive and accept the 2020 consolidated financial statements. And with that, I will open it up to council for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Boxer. Council, questions? Councilor Stoner and then Councilor Pettingill.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm just wondering if staff can further elaborate on what actually entails that 39 million in developer contributed assets. Is that physical assets? Are those CAC contributions? What do those look like?
Yes, through the mayor. So basically, when a development is occurring where the developer is paying for the capital infrastructure, so it could be roads, it can be infrastructure in terms of utilities, they pay for it, and then it's contributed back to the district as an asset. So that's been funded by them, and then they contribute it to us. So we actually put it on our books as a tangible capital asset.
Councilor Pettingill?
Yeah, thanks. A small detail one and then maybe a bigger one. On page 18 of our report, in accounts receivable, it says trade accounts and other. I'm just wondering if you can explain what those are.
Yeah, through the mayor. Great question. So that is a whole bunch of different accounts receivable, and they could be everything from receivable on business licenses to facility rentals, that kind of thing. So it's basically all of our revenue streams. If there is any money owed, that will sit in the trades receivable.
Okay, and is it, there's a variance, a lot of these are increased in 2020. Is that, with property taxes and utilities and so on, I think that's, as I understand, that's part of what we did around COVID. Would that apply to this line item as well?
That's correct, under accounts receivable, yes.
Okay, thanks. And the other, I was looking at the definition of assets and what were and weren't included. It seems at this time that natural assets aren't part of that. I know I believe we're doing some work on that. Is there something, will that automatically become part of the asset lines in these reports going forward at some point, or is there something that council needs to direct for that to happen, or some sort of a change? Like, I guess, is this sort of a natural progression at the way accounting standards are going, or do we need to actively do something at some point to include natural assets?
Through the mayor, great question. At this time, we do not have natural assets as part of our tangible capital assets. I don't believe at this very point in time that there is a requirement to do so in the very near future. In terms of quantifying and doing the work, that would be a significant undertaking, and we would certainly bring that back to council. Perhaps Paul or Andrew, do you want to speak to any of the upcoming potential legislation on natural assets?
Yeah, happy to. So Paul Fripp here, engagement partner with BDO Canada. As you mentioned, Heather, currently there is no standard under Canadian public sector accounting standards that allow for the capitalization of natural tangible capital assets. One of the biggest reasons for this is that to meet the definition of an asset, you have to have control over it, but rarely is there control over natural infrastructure. There are different working groups that are currently looking at this issue that recognize the tremendous service capacity that natural capital assets provide to communities, but there is not yet a working group at the Canadian Public Sector Accounting Board that is looking at implementing a standard at this time. So it's in its infancy. It's probably coming down the road, but not anytime soon.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Watchard, I think you covered this, but you were moving quite quickly and I may have missed it. And so our cash and cash equivalents have increased quite substantially over 2019, and I'm wondering if you could explain that increase of $20 million again.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. So there's a few moving parts there. We have the standard increase to provisions and reserves. So those are the budgeted increases that we'd be putting away. So that would be, on the one side in the reserves, and then on the other side, it would be an increase to cash. We had the BC Restart grant. So that was 3.8 million. The full revenue was recognized and the full amount was received into cash. And then we have the $6 million, which was the school tax delay. So as of December 31st, we still had the cash for the what we would normally then reimburse to the school tax. So we were, because of the delay from COVID-19, the deadline was delayed. So we were able to keep that cash until the very deadline. So that was in January, which we actually had remitted that cash. So those all in all will and then sorry, there was another piece that for internal borrowing. So when we go to issuance for longer term borrowing, we get the cash back from what we've borrowed internally. So there's a few moving parts there.
All right, so given that we don't have the delay on school taxes this year, and I don't think we're getting another 3.8 million from the government, we should see that even out at the end of this fiscal year.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, Councilor Rice. We still can't hear you. Uh-oh. Councilor Rice is going to be mute for the rest of the day. No, is your microphone turned off or? Yeah, some Somehow the mic on your computer got turned off. Okay, it wasn't urgent. Perhaps we get IT to give Council Race a call just to work out the sound issue in the background, because I'm sure he'd like to participate in the rest of the meeting. All right, so I don't see any more questions on the financial statements. Ms. Boxer, can you explain how, so if we take on all these new tangible capital assets once they get built, how do those flow into our asset management plans? Because obviously that will increase our operations to maintain those assets and in the future. So how does it flow from acknowledging, almost $40 million worth of new tangible capital assets in this budget? And then how do all of you sort of project that forward into what it means to maintain those resources over time?
Through you, Mayor, in terms of inventory, it would become part of the asset management inventorying. In terms of operational, I would have to ask if Mr. Buxton is on the line to perhaps explain how that would be incorporated. My first inclination would be that any operational requirements would then just fold into the financial plan, but how far down the line would they look at, dispositions and repairs and maintenance would certainly depend on the asset. And then in terms of operations, it would likely have to be immediate if there's immediate operational needs. But yeah, certainly if Mr. Buxton's on the line, he can speak to the mechanism to which they assess those operational needs.
Yes, thanks, Ms. Boxford. Yeah, as you said, they're automatically sort of deposited. That information is automatically deposited, particularly for linear infrastructure, into the GIS system. So it's sort of automatically inventoried into the asset management inventory. How that gets handled then would be as we cycle through water master plans or sewer master plans, each iteration they get picked up and then they'll start to get into the queue for future work. Of course, most infrastructure, it's minimum probably 2 decades before you're looking at any necessary upgrades on typical infrastructure, valves, pipes, pumps, and notwithstanding. But as soon as they're in the inventory, they start to get included on preventive maintenance programs, and then as we cycle through the iterations on master plans, they'll get picked up and replacement gets done at that stage.
Thank you. All right.
This is just a mic check. Can you hear me now?
I can.
So all I did was reboot. Don't ask me. But my question, do I have a moment to ask the question?
Sure.
Yeah, it was Ms. Boxer. The debt in the statements, it lists the the various debt issuances and the interest rate. And some of those, I believe, are terms of up to, I think, around 20 years. And I'm wondering if you could tell me if the interest rates are locked in for that period or whether they're periodically reviewed. In other words, are we vulnerable to a spike in interest rates?
Through you, Mayor. Great question. The debt cycle is every 5 years. So effectively, yes, there is a risk of interest spikes. However, MFA does a very good job of controlling that in terms of pooling and getting the best interest rates. So, the risk is low, but certainly every 5 years is the cycle in which it might have a 20-year debt issuance, but every 5 years is the renewal.
And that's every 5 years per debt issuance from each individual debt.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor Stoner?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on your question, Mayor Elliott. I think the response with regards to how it gets inventoried and the kind of long-term management piece or maintenance piece was addressed, but I didn't hear a response with regards to the operations and how we address that. Does that just happen in the like every annual budgeting cycle? Once we've received those assets, staff manage the operations component respectively?
Through the chair, yes. As you've seen, we have operational implications often identified when we're approving development. So if there's something that's going to need to be operationalized, that is appearing on an annual basis through the budget as we add assets. So yeah, you're seeing in service level increases on roads and parks, and we add more parks. So that's how the operational stuff is captured in each budget cycle.
Thank you. All right, so the staff recommendations that the District of Squamish receive and accept the 2020 consolidated financial statements as presented on the report. That is moved by Councilor Herford, second by Councilor French. Any comments on those? Call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. I need a motion to close by Councilor Herford, second by Councilor Stoner. Any opposed? Motion carries. So there. You need to leave this meeting, and then there is a separate link for the closed meeting.